Our next talk is by Dr. Ketu Ramachandra Sekhar ji. Very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you for making time for the program. He will be speaking on Bahyarthavadin critique by Utpaladeva and Abhinavaguptacarya. Just a brief introduction to the speaker. Dr. Ketu Ramachandra Sekhar ji has a doctorate in Indian epistemology and is a recipient of Prince of Wales Medal for outstanding performance in University of Madras, and was fortunate to complete his studies under his guru Vidyavachaspati Brahmashri Goda Venkateshwara Shastrigal. He was selected as a fellow for studies in neuroaesthetics and Indian rhetorics by Ministry of Culture, Government of India. He was a part of academic team of scholars across Europe on discussion of Natya texts and a member of Aix-en-Provence University, France academic panel. He is also associated with Samskrita theatre for past 28 years and has acted in many plays produced by Samskrita Ranga, founded by Dr. V. Raghavan. His knowledge in Shaiva Pratyabhigna school is well recognized by scholars of Shaiva, Kashmiri Shaivism, and he has been a regular contributor to journals on Kashmiri Shaivism and on especially focusing on contributions of Acharya Abhinavagupta. Dr. Ketuji has attended several national and international conferences. He has written several research articles and books, and including a detailed study of Abhinaya Dharpana of Nandikeshwara, an independent commentary on Devi Mahatmya, and many other such books. His advice is often sought in matters related to Prayoga aspect of Tantra Shastra as well. He owes all his achievements to his guru, Brahmashri Goda Venkateshwara Shastrigal, and he currently runs the course development team at Siddhanta Knowledge Foundation. Thank you again, sir. Please go ahead and start your session.
विशुद्धि ज्ञान देहाय त्रिवेदी दिव्य चक्षुषे श्रेय प्राप्ति निमित्ताय नमः सोमार्थ. At the outset, I would like to thank Nagaraj Paturi Garu for inviting me to this particular symposium, and also to Shri Nitin Sridhar Garu and Indica for organizing this important symposium. I'd like to spend few minutes placed before you as to why our Darshanikas went to great lengths to engage in polemics with any and all opinions which they considered inaccurate representation of the whole truth. And owing to the paucity of time, I am going to approach this Bahyarthavadin critique from more of an historical, literary historical perspective, rather than go into the subject itself. The subject has been introduced already by Sri Venkatesh Tatacharya, but from the Mimamsa point of view. But I will be approaching it from a textual history point of view. So, to start, I am going to use the concept of the near enemy, which is introduced by the Buddhists themselves, to show why it is important to engage in polemics. So what is the concept of near enemies? So what are the near enemies to the truth? So it is normally used to refer to a slightly distorted version of spiritual teachings or statements that are close to the profound and the subtle truths. But they are distorted enough, just enough, to make a big difference over time. And when we are talking about deep and fundamental truths, and getting it a little bit wrong probably doesn't seem like a big thing in the short run. But our Darshanikas felt that in the long run, it did matter. It's just like making a tiny adjustment to the rudder of our boats when we are sailing in the sea. It makes probably a little difference in the beginning. But if you have sailed for, let's say, 1,000 miles, nautical miles, then you would be landing up on a completely different continent altogether. So understanding this near enemies to the truth and why they are near enemies and not the truth itself was considered hugely important for any darshanika, any spiritual seeker who wants to get past the beginner stages and into the deeply fulfilling spiritual path. Having said that, it's important to note that if a near enemy is near enough, it can be a temporary ally. So this is what Acharya Utpaladeva also tries to use as a tactic while dealing with the different schools. But as the stakes gets higher in the spiritual practice, there is no such thing as close enough enemy. And the comforting affirmations has to be sacrificed on the altar of the truth, or else our spiritual progress stalls. So there is a form of seemingly benign wishful thinking expressed in the cliche, which is common in an alternative spiritual communities today, that all paths lead to the same goal, and they misquote ekam sad vipraha bahuda vadanti. So this an idea which is often strongly linked to an absurd and yet another popular notion that all religions are fundamentally talking about the same thing. One can only believe the latter statement through an extreme version of what we would call as a logical fallacy called cherry picking. But this could only logically be the case if all the paths ultimately led to the same goal. That's where the difference comes. The problem is that relativism is a totally incoherent as a philosophy. Because though it sounds like a very nice idea, it simply cannot be the case that incompatible points of view are equally valid. So, though people are free to think what they like, we can't say that everyone is equally entitled to their opinion in a public square of discourse, because there simply are better reasons to hold some opinions over others. So, this element of required clarity was identified and clearly spelled out in the rigors of polemics which we find in the Darshana literature. And coming to the specific topic, in the Indian scenario, in the Indian milieu, we must ask what circumscribes and differentiates one tradition, one sampradaya from the another. So we can reduce it to five criteria as operative in the order of importance as a body of text that belongs to that system and no other, authoritative teachers or acharyas consecrated in that system and no other, the fact that the system makes an effort to distinguish itself from others, competition with other systems, such as the claim to offer a definitive nishreyasa or a moksha or liberation above and beyond them. And fifth, the belief in a founder unique to that system. So when we consider the five, though we can go into details into each of these, the Shaiva Dharma possessed all of these, sorry, possessed all of this, and by Shaiva Dharma here, I refer to that distinct initiatory path, the path that followed Diksha as the most important element or eligibility criteria for moksha. And this is different from the non-initiatory devotional Shaiva path. So when we come to, yeah, so when we come to the Diksha or the paths, the first or the earliest instantation for which we have clear evidence is that which is known as the Atimarga, which is commonly designated by one of its three primary branches, the Pashupatas, the Kalamukhas, and the Kapalikas. And all the three are explicitly part of one tradition, which is founded by Lakulesha, who is considered as an avatar of Shiva himself, who descended in a cremation ground and animated the body of a deceased to reveal his teachings to the world. The second instantation, which is substantially larger, is that of the Mantra Marga or the Siddhanta. So this is also known as the Agamic Shaivism. And it is said to have been founded by Sri Kantanatha, also identified as an incarnation of Shiva himself. So the speciality of this, it is the Panchasrotas, the five streams, wherein the 10 Shiva Vedas and the 18 Rudra Veda Agamas were from the different phases, the Sadyojata, the five phases of Shiva. Further, these scriptures taught unique theological concepts or doctrines, the Agamas. That is the concept of the three malas, the Panchakrityas, the five acts, the Panchakanchukas, the 36 tattvas, and so on, which were quite unique to this system, and argued that only the liberation achieved through the Shaiva scriptural teachings is true and final liberation. More specifically, the Shivadharmins had an inclusivistic view, which taught that the other systems granted some form of salvation from the bondage and suffering. But they argued also that their soteriological goals did not reach the highest level of reality, which is termed as the Shuddhadva, where only the highest form of Shiva as pure consciousness. So, in Acharya Kshemaraja's Pratyabhijna Sutra, and in his commentary on that, self-commentary, auto-commentary on that, there is a sutra which says Tadbhumikaha Sarvadarshana Sthitaya. And here he explains that Sarvesham Charvakadi Darshanana Sthitaya Siddhantaha tasya etasya atmanaha natasya swa ichha avagrihitaha kritrimaha bhumika. And then in the elaborate commentary, he tries to show to which level do the followers of the different spiritual paths attain. The highest being the Shuddhatva, which only the Shaivas can reach. So it's a very quick thing. So the Sankhyas were believed to reach to the up to the level of the Purusha, and the Patanjala yogins were believed to attain to the level just below it. And below it, at the level of the Prakriti, were placed the Pancharatrikas. And the Parinamavada Vedantins, held to be slightly inferior to the Vivartavada Vedantins, were placed above them at the level of the Purusha. And and below them, at the level of the Gunas, were placed the Jainas. And probably because they were seen as taking the cultivation of Sattva to be an end in itself. And below them, on the level of the Buddhi, were the Naiyayikas and the Buddhists, since they held on that the only real thing pertaining to a self is the stream of cognitions. Yet other schools were arranged in this hierarchy, including the Vaiseshikas at the level of Manas, the Shrautins or the Mimamsakas at the far more lower level of Tanmanas. So, of course, we must remember that or understand that despite the verb like reach being associated with the various levels of the tattvas, the latter do not much denote planes of reality as levels of awareness or knowledge. Yet the model of vertical hierarchy, while not to be taken literally, is valid in terms of view of reality one has from a given level, where the higher ones has reached, and more all-compassing and therefore accurate is the one view which is at least the Shaivas arguments. So, while the Shaiva schools made considerable advances in producing the exegetical treatises, polemical treatises to establish their system in the larger canvas of philosophical scenario of Bharata, it was Dharmakirti whom the Shaivas of several schools took on as their principal interlocutor, as well as Dharmottara, who was one of his prime successors. For example, Dharmakirti is quoted no less than 44 times within a single chapter in the commentary by Bhattacharya Ramakanta. And the non-dualist Shaivas, about whom we are going to see in the course of the lecture, such as Acharya Utpaladeva and Acharya Abhinavagupta, they also engaged more frequently with the Pramana Vartika, Pramana Vinishchaya, and the Pramana Samuchaya, and the Nyaya Bindu. Not only that, they were clearly aware of many of the commentaries on those works as well. To start with Acharya Utpaladeva, uh, the central work of the Shaiva Parama Advaita Vada, which is the name given to the system by Acharya Utpaladeva. Today we know it as Nitya or Kashmir Shaivism in a very, very popular notion. The Saidhantika name is the Parama Advaita Vada. So the central work of this is Ishvara Pratyabhijnakarika, authored by Acharya Utpaladeva. It is a monumental yet a concise work of philosophical dialectic. It deals with, or it engages with Buddhist thought at a much deeper level. Not only that, it paraphrases or alludes to arguments of the Sankhyas, the Mimamsakas, the Vijnanavadins, the Sautrantikas, the Vaibhashikas, the Vaiyakaranas, especially coming from the thing, three people, that is Jinnaga, Dharmakirti, and Bhartrihari. These are the three people with whom Acharya Utpaladeva engaged in detail. So whole chapters were given over to present the Buddhist view. And interestingly, Acharya Utpaladeva would sometimes have his closest Buddhist interlocutor do his arguing for him, such as in the second chapter of the Ishvara Pratyabhijnakarika. Acharya also, Utpaladeva also authored another work from the Nyaya perspective, namely the Ishvara Siddhi. And here he was presenting his arguments not only against the Buddha, but also against the Mimamsakas, the Sankhyas as well. So, in the larger scale, he was succeeded by his grand disciple, that is, he taught Acharya Lakshmana Gupta, from whom Acharya Abhinavagupta learned. So, Acharya Abhinavagupta carried the mantle of Utpaladeva very high. Acharya Abhinavagupta's commentary, which is known as the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vivritti Vimarshini, is of an altogether different scale and character from anything else seen in the Pratyabhijna literature. This work, which is a long and an extremely elaborate commentary on Acharya Utpaladeva's own, which is only partly extant, which is Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vivritti, is arguably Abhinavagupta's magnum opus when it comes from the dialectical point of view, and represents his fullest exploration of the Pratyabhijna traditions. So, in the given short time, I will just like to examine in particular the arguments for and against the existence of external or extra mental objects, the Bahyarthas, given in the Ishvara Pratyabhijnakarika. So, the first section of this text begins in the verse 1 and 3 with a general case made for an idealist view that the objects can in no way exist independent of or separate from awareness. Then in the next two verses, an opponent's argument for the reality of mind-independent objects is raised. And then from the verse 6 onwards, following these arguments, they are rejected, and specific Pratyabhijna argument for arguments that objects the Pratyabhijna point of view, wherein the objects can only exist as a part of awareness of a single permanent knower, is explained and defended. This is the schema of the chapter. So the objection raised against the idealistic view in the Karika is not a generic or a common sense realist view, but it actually represents a specific philosophical position which was well known in the time of Acharya Utpaladeva and Abhinavagupta. This is the Anumeya Bahyarthavada, that is the inferable external object view. And it is labeled as the view of the Sautrantika Buddhists. So this Anumeya Bahyarthavada held by the Sautrantika Buddhists suggests that even though our consciousness, yeah, so even though our consciousness only directly perceives images called the akaras that form the content of our awareness, we can infer the existence of external objects. And this inference is based on the observation that certain images or experiences appear in our consciousness only at specific times and not at others, without any obvious cause within our own consciousness. Therefore, they argue that there must be some cause outside of our consciousness that leads us to perceive something, such as the color blue, at a particular moment. So, this inferred external cause is what they refer to as the object of our awareness. So, the chapter which outlines this theory and responses made to it is a very interesting one. Uh, it is interesting from the point of view to explore Acharya Abhinavagupta's knowledge and also the attitude towards the Buddhists, as it is certainly concerned with two different groups of Buddhist philosophies which were at odds with each other, the Vijnanavada and the Sautrantika, and how they were critiqued by the Pratyavijna point of view. So there is a complex interplay which Utpaladeva creates between the two different Buddhist views under the consideration, and his own position, which he calls as the Paramadvaita or the Ishvara Advayavada. There is a belief in non-duality in or as Shiva. So Utpaladeva is obviously is unwilling to accept the Bahyarthavadin's view, but also wishes to differentiate his position from that of the Buddhist Vijnanavadin, the Buddhist idealistic point of view, showing in effect that the Ishvara Advayavada, that is the Pratyavijna Shaiva, is able to formulate an effective rejoinder to the Buddhist Bahyarthavadin, while the Buddhist idealist or the Vijnanavadin cannot do. So this brings us to the question, who are Abhinavagupta's Bahyarthavadins? So one of the most obvious features of the historical interest in Abhinavagupta's account is that where Utpaladeva usually leaves his Buddhist opponents and interlocutors anonymous, Acharya Abhinavagupta often puts names to them. I'm just quoting from one particular passage wherein he says, by the Vijnanavadins, it has been stated in length in Dinnaga's Alambana Pariksha and others in Vasubandhu's Vijnapti Matrata Siddhi. Here and there in the works of Bhatta Shankarananda, such as the Prajnalankara and elsewhere. This is a quotation, the translation of the quotation. So Abhinavagupta has named the Buddhist Vijnanavadins whose views he is considering. And in the same way, the names are obviously Dinnaga, Vasubandhu, and Bhatta Shankarananda. And where Utpaladeva was content to leave the unnamed Buddhist Bahyarthavadins, who attack both Buddhist and the Shaiva idealism, Abhinavagupta here too specifies or supplies us with the identity of at least some of them. Near the conclusion of the presentation on the Bhakyarthavadin view in the Karika, the fifth Karika, Utpaladeva apparently presents a supplemental argument in favor of the Bhakyarthavada. And he simply puts it by the Bhakyarthavadins themselves. Bhakyarthavadivihi eva. Elaborating this, Acharya says, for here, it means the Bahyarthavadi is Upadhyaya Dharmottara. And the work which he is referring to is Bahyartha Siddhi. So here Abhinavagupta is making it plain that he believes that Dharmottara had written a work by name Bahyartha Siddhi, in which he had argued for a Bahyarthavadin position. So the quotation is that Upadhyayaha dharmottaradivihi vakyartha siddhyado. So there is one other passage in which Acharya Abhinavagupta refers to a specific doctrine which is associated with Shubhagupta. He is another most famous and widely known post-Dharmakirti Buddhist advocate of the Bahyarthavada. And he is also the author of Bahyartha Siddhi Karika. So in explaining the Bahyarthavadin's response to the challenge of explaining how the sthulata, the macroscopic objects can appear in our awareness, even though no such objects can exist externally, Abhinavagupta quotes a Bahyarthavadin claim to the effect that the macroscopeness is a property of appearance. So he says, Pratibhasa dharmaha sthulata. Pratibhasa dharmaha sthulata. So this quotation is from Shubhagupta's Bahyartha Siddhi Karika. So this reference to Shubhagupta, wherein he says that the blue atoms, even though they are infinitesimally small and they are individually imperceptible, they can produce in us an awareness of an apparently macroscopic object. The case being that the macroscopic size, the sthulata here, belongs to the perceptual image and not to the atoms which cause it to arise. So this line of inquiry leads directly into the second, perhaps even more surprising element in Acharya Abhinavagupta's reconstruction of the history of Buddhist thought on the objects. The question being that, what is Dharmakirti's position on the matter? So Abhinavagupta had specified the Vijnanavadins, Vinnaga, Vasubandhu, and Shankaranandana, who are referred earlier. And conspicuous by his absence in that list is Dharmakirti, which is a general understanding, which is currently amongst the scholars. And we have to keep in mind that this is not a oversight or the result of some deliberately restricted subgrouping of Buddhist idealists or Vijnanavadins. Rather, it can be clearly shown from other evidences within the text that as far as Acharya Abhinavagupta is concerned, Dharmakirti cannot be definitively be classified either as Vijnanavadin or be classified as the Bahyarthavadin. But he has to be seen as someone who is neutral, or at least as someone whose real views on the question of the external objects cannot be conclusively be determined. So we do find here many of the So we do find here many of the standard quotations of Dharmakirti offered up in the support of the Vijnanavadin position. The most famous quote being the Sahopalamba Niyamata Abhedaha Nila Tadhyo. Because of the necessary co-apprehension, there is no difference between the blue and the awareness of the blue. Nila Tadhyo. But in addition to these, there are quite a few passages of Dharmakirti which is quoted by the Bahyarthavadins in support of the externalistic stance. At least in Acharya Abhinavagupta's reconstruction, the Vijnanavadins and the Bahyarthavadins, if I can use the term, are both card-carrying Dharmakirti followers. And they both freely and extensively quote from his works in support of their own positions. The Bahyarthavadin, portrayed in Abhinavagupta, sees himself as the follower of Dharmakirti. And he quotes two passages from Pramanavartika in support of his argument for the reality of the external objects. And this he does obviously in the belief that the Dharmakirti statements are not only consistent but actually advocate an externalistic position. So we see that much of Abhinavagupta's reconstruction of the history of the Buddhist debate over the Bahyartha is based on the text he apparently had access to. And few, at least for time being, we do not, such as Bahyartha Siddhi of Dharmottara, the Prajnalankara, and other Prakarana texts by Bhatta Shankaranandana as well. And not only that, Acharya Utpaladeva's Vivritti itself is not available to us in full, though a part has been discovered now and being edited. So some of the important gaps in our knowledge of the background here has certainly been filled by these new discoveries, and others certainly will be filled, hopefully, in the near future. But several important fragments of Utpaladeva's Vivritti, which are now being recovered, uh, whatever it is very clear when we try to look at the overall picture that we get about Acharya Abhinavagupta's perspective on the evolution of Buddhist thought, especially concerning the Vakyartha view. So, if we could summarize these into 5 points, he clearly viewed Vasubandhu and Dinnaga as a strong proponents of Vijnanavada, which is the doctrine that only consciousness is real. He found Dharmakirti's position on the external objects, the Bhakyartha, to be ambiguous or at the very least even debated by his own followers. Third conclusion was that he identified Dharmottara and Shankaranandana as the leading post-Dharmakirti figures advocating for the Buddhist Vakyarthavada and the Vijnanavada positions, respectively. Fourth, he observed that Shankaranandana's critique of Dharmottara's belief of Vakyartha was not just about whether external objects exist. Instead, it was deeply connected to a more fundamental issue. Dharmottara's views on Adhyavasaya, the process of determination or mental affirmation that is involved in perceiving anything as real. Dharmottara believed that Adhyavasaya plays a crucial role in all valid means of knowledge, that is pramana, meaning that it is essential for recognizing and validating the reality of what we perceive. And also that Shankaranandana often challenged this idea, arguing that if you can undermine the role of Adhyavasaya in perception, you also weaken the argument for the existence of external objects. So, in other words, for Shankaranandana, showing that Adhyavasaya is not as central as Dharmottara claimed would be enough to discredit the belief in the external objects. So, Acharya Abhinavagupta saw this critique as a key strategy in the broader debate about the nature of reality. And like Utpaladeva, he uses the strategy of one pitted against the other Buddhist logic to trump above the both. And in conclusion, I would just like to, and there are many other standpoints, such as the Apoha and others, wherein a lot of discussion is taking place between the Pratyabhijna scholars and the Buddhist. But to conclude, we have to remember that the Trika as a system stands out for its profound critique of Buddhist philosophies, particularly on the nature of external reality. In fact, Acharya Kshemaraja, while commenting on the Shiva Sutras, which were the revealed texts revealed to sage Vasugupta by Lord Shiva himself on the sacred Mahadeva mountain, states that these Shiva Sutras were brought to the world at the time when the Buddhist teachings, particularly those which were emphasizing on the duality and the external objects, were spreading widely. And the Shiva Sutra, intent of Shiva Sutra was to dispel the misconceptions propagated by Buddhist thinkers. And he uses the name of a thinker, Nagabodhi. So misconceptions which were propagated by the Buddhist thinkers such as Nagabodhi and others who adhered to the considered position, which was a lower viewpoint. Adhara Darshana is what he says. So Trika as a system has always aimed to re-establish the non-dualistic transcendental wisdom of Shiva that had been overshadowed by the dualistic interpretations by the Buddhists. So with this, I conclude my speech. I really thank Indica Moksha once again for giving me this opportunity. I hope I was able to stick to my time. Dhanyavad.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ketuji. It was a very excellent session. Thank you for shedding light about Abhinavaguptacharya's views on this topic. Thank you very much. Nagaraji, do you have any comments to share?
No, only appreciation, admiration for such a wonderful talk. I always wonder why Ketuji is in Chennai there. He must have been in some very big university position. But probably he likes Chennai so much that he sacrificed all the better opportunities. Such a wonderful talk, such a meticulously done talk. And also the details of the newly coming up texts and manuscripts that you have been mentioning. We will definitely publish this in our Indica Today magazine. And those have to be taken up by scholars like you for better manuscript research, or we have to ask a KSRI or some organization to take up that kind of a study. It is so inspiring to know that such work is coming up. And please mention all as a list, and let us talk to KSRI and see if we can do something.
We do. Got it.
Yeah.
Dhanyavad.
Okay, thank you again, Dr. Ketuji.